Hi, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. First off, I want to say thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your generosity and your encouragement. This video was made possible by you. For those of you who would like to join the patron community and get early access to videos like this one, get exclusive access to videos only available to patrons, and to access a monthly Q&A with me, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. I appreciate your support. Today we'll talk about the transit of Venus through the houses of the horoscope. Now, the first question you might ask is, why do we need another video talking about Venus passing through the houses? Well, the answer is that I come at it from the perspective of a traditional astrologer. As you might know, traditional astrology was practiced in Europe before the year 1700 or 1800, depending on your sources. This form of astrology was very much focused on prediction. It was not the only focus of traditional astrology, but the ability to see the future and look for concrete events in the future was considered quite key in traditional astrology. Modern astrology, which is pretty much what was practiced 20th century and of course now in the 21st century, really came into its own parallel with the psychoanalytic movements of the 20th century, of Freud and of Carl Jung. And as such, it was primarily developed to look inward, to look at the psyche, to explore the psychology of the individual. Forecasting or prediction was viewed as just not that interesting and maybe a little bit disreputable. However, as traditional astrology came into its own in the last few decades, we have found so many important predictive tools to help us understand what the movement of the stars really means in our own lives, in concrete and external ways. As a traditional astrologer, I feel that I have a certain unique perspective on this, and I hope that I can share that with you today. Now, as you might know, Venus is going to be spending 3 months in the sign of Gemini this year. And that is because Venus is going retrograde in Gemini. Usually she spends about 1 month in any given sign, but this year she spends 3 months in a single sign. That means that wherever Gemini is in your natal chart is going to be very emphasized and activated in a particularly Venusian manner. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. So we'll talk about kind of the general meaning of Venus retrograde, and I highly recommend that you check out the other videos in this playlist that I have created specifically about Venus in Gemini and Venus retrograde as well. They will help you understand her cycle a little bit better and really see what a special time this is this year that could really lead to a lot of personal growth as well as positive events in your own life. Now, Venus, as you might know, has everything to do with beauty, love, union, pleasure, entertainment, the arts, and of course women. Now, whatever she activates in your chart, all those areas of life, all those Venusian areas I just described, are going to be subject to perhaps reevaluation, retrospection, revisiting, which are all wonderful retrograde keywords for a planet. Sometimes people say that a very common manifestation of Venus is old boyfriends or girlfriends coming back into your life, although I think that's actually fairly rare. There are many other ways that Venus retrograde can manifest in your life personally. So think about where Gemini is in your chart. Now, unless you use the whole sign house system, it's possible that Gemini actually covers 2 houses in your own natal horoscope. In that case, you will want to make note of those 2 house meanings from what I say today, because they both may be activated sequentially. As Venus passes through one house, she will activate it, and then as she enters the second house or the next house, she may activate that. So be aware that you actually may have a couple different houses activated this year, depending on the house system that you're using, and depending on what Venus is doing in your chart specifically. All right, so let's get started. So Venus passing through the ascendant, or the first house, is going to be very noticeable. This is because the ascendant, or the first house, is an angular house. It means that it's one of the houses that particularly focuses on the immediate personal experience. The ascendant has everything to do with the body, particularly the face or head, but really the entire physical body as a whole, your vitality, your thoughts and your state of mind and your emotions. So as Venus passes through that first house, you might be thinking about love and romance and art. The way that it can manifest in the personal sphere is that you might think about beautifying yourself, becoming more Venusian. The only challenge with doing that now is that if you make a dramatic change in your appearance, even as Venus is retrograding through that first house, you may have to redo it or make some changes later on. So the better plan would be to use that retrograde period of Venus to plan what you want to do and really think it over, do some research, maybe talk to some people about it. But really don't actually make that change until after Venus turns direct. This is, for example, not the best time to give yourself a new haircut. After she goes direct, all is fair game. Now, if Gemini is your second house, Venus is going to be impacting your money, your income, certainly your values to some extent, and also your relationship with food. Now, the second house basically contains everything that sustains and supports us. So, again, Venus generally is positive in the second house. She's really positive in most of the houses. But she's generally good for money and good for enjoyment and pleasure. She might bring some money into your life, but again, because of that retrograde cycle, you might find that she's a little bit slow in bringing it about. There might be some negotiation, some back and forth, a feeling of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, before that gift or before that giving of money or any kind of assets or benefits is actually established. So be aware that it might take a while, perhaps even after Venus goes direct, June 24th, that you might really get the thing that you were hoping for, particularly if it's a tangible and financial benefit. Now, Venus passing through the third house is particularly interesting this year. This is because Venus is going to be in Gemini, which is of course a Mercury sign, which is very communicative. It's very much all about writing. It's about verbal displays of affection, and it's about love and romance as mediated through technology. Given what's been going on and that we're all doing some form of social distancing, my prediction is that this year, as Venus transits Gemini, and don't forget she's going to be there for, again, about 3 months, so into the beginning of August, I think you'll find that Venus in Gemini in the third house is going to have a transformative effect on how you communicate with others. There could be romantic text messages, there could be communication or even flirting through modes of technology. There could also be a reevaluation of your relationships with your siblings or extended family. And that's because those folks are all ruled by the third house. Now, the fourth house, if Venus in Gemini passes through it in your chart, will have everything to do with your own home, your homeland, if you happen not to live in your country of birth, if this is your family, as in your parents as a unit, your ancestors, as well as any gardens or fields or any kind of agricultural activity that you might be engaged in. I know a lot of people this year are growing their own gardens and are trying to grow their own food. So as Venus passes through this house, you're really going to be interested in making sure that this part of your life is flourishing. Again, you could be focused on, growing your own food or just making a beautiful flower garden. Lots of different possibilities. But again, my recommendation, whatever you do, is not to make drastic changes until Venus goes direct, June 24th, ideally a little bit later than that. You also might be having a longer process of some sort with your mother or your mother figure. And this is because the fourth does rule the parents as a group, but Venus, of course, rules the female parent. The 10th house specifically rules the mom, but I've also seen the fourth house kind of generally relate to the parents. Now, the fifth house, if Venus enters the fifth house in Gemini for you this year, is actually Venus's own house. This is the house where she has her joy, where she feels the most at home. Now, Venus in the fifth is very much about pleasure, games, entertainment, It's certainly a very sexual house. It's romance, art, all those things that you think of with Venus actually belong to the fifth house as well. This could be a particularly enjoyable and just a fun period for you. It's certainly something that we can all use with all the serious news that we've been bombarded with for the last few months. And I think that Venus in Gemini in the fifth is going to be a lighthearted time when you start thinking about, how do I have fun again? How do I kind of reinvigorate that part of my life? Now, if Venus is going to be transiting the sixth house, this is one potential area of caution, although it could still be positive. The sixth is traditionally known as the house of illness. It doesn't mean that you will get ill, and on the contrary, because Venus is a benefic planet, her passage through the sixth house could actually be good for your health. Because she's going through the sixth house in a retrograde fashion, and only later she goes direct, it could be that you are going to have to get additional information and reevaluate certain areas of your life and of your body perhaps that are ruled by Venus. So Venus, of course, rules the female sexual organs, but she also rules the kidneys. So there could be a lot of different areas of the body that are impacted by Venus. Generally, I think that her transit through this house will be experienced positively. Now, the one thing I would caution you is that Venus can bring her own illnesses. This is unlikely unless only if you have other, I would say, difficult things going on in your chart at the same time. By herself, Venus is quite positive. So some of the typical ailments of Venus could include elevated blood sugar, illnesses that come from overindulgence in sweet food or greasy food, as she rules these two food groups, if that's what you want to call them. And also any kind of what in the old days used to be known as wantonness. So we're really talking about STDs or sexually transmitted diseases. So these are all things to watch for if you have Venus transiting through the sixth. More generally, though, she will be positive going through this house. Now, Venus passing through the seventh is sort of a typical Venusian experience in certain ways. The seventh, of course, represents relationships, romantic, but also relationships of competition and rivalry. So this could be an opportunity for you to make peace with an old rival or enemy of yours, but it's also a great opportunity to reevaluate and reestablish old relationship ties. This could be with someone that you're in a relationship with, and you're kind of renegotiating and sort of rejiggering what you really want emotionally from this relationship. Or it could be returning to an old flame, just like that Venus retrograde stereotype I mentioned earlier. Now, Venus passing through the eighth house is quite interesting because the eighth house has a lot of negative connotations in traditional astrology. It is known as the house of death, but it's also the house of debt, as in money that we owe other people, or in some cases, that money that other people may owe us. Now, the eighth house is also associated with anxiety and fear. It's certainly something many of us have been experiencing with the pandemic. So to me, it seems that Venus passing through the eighth house could be an opportunity to relax for a few months, to not be quite so negative and quite so anxious. Because Venus is going to be going retrograde, I think there's going to be a lot of reevaluation and rethinking how much fear and anxiety is really productive versus how much is actually protective. You also will need to think about, what does it mean when Venus is activating the house of debt, for example? Does that mean that other people will bring you some money that perhaps they've owed you for a while? It's quite possible. You might have to do something about it first, such as talk to them, because of course Venus is going to be passing through this house for a long time, which represents a longer process. Now, Venus passing through the ninth is a really lovely combination because, of course, Gemini rules books and studies and even higher learning in some cases. So Venus passing through the ninth house of higher learning, of foreign journeys or contacts with foreign people, as well as spirituality and religion, could be quite constructive. You will find enjoyment in exercising your mind and in broadening your horizons. This would be a great opportunity to learn a skill, for example, that is Venusian in some way, such as, learn about art history. Take a class, do something that will expand your horizons and make you a more educated person. Venus passing through the 10th is going to be very immediate and visible because the 10th house is a very visible house. It's at the very top of the chart. So this will have everything to do with your social status, as well as Venus perhaps elevating your profile for the 3 months where she is now. So you might find that Venus is going to make you more popular, more sought after, more appealing and attractive. She could be very good for your career. Maybe you'll become a social media influencer, which just seems like a very Venus and Gemini kind of job. Whatever it is, Venus in the 10th is going to be quite favorable. As I had mentioned earlier, it is the house of the mother, so there could be some longer process involving your mom. It could be the relationship with your mother, or it could be something dealing with her particularly. You might be helping her or doing something for her. So this could be an opportunity to spend extra time with mom. Now, Venus passing through the 11th house of friends is going to be very enjoyable, very fun. The 11th house is also the house that's generally associated with good fortune and with benefits coming from other people who just want to help you. And that is quite lovely. So I think that for those of you who have Venus passing through the 11th, you will find your life is a little bit better. Other people may do you favors. You may get unexpected strokes of luck. It's just a really nice time. Again, there's going to be a little bit of a perhaps delay or 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's not going to be smooth and fast, but in general, it's going to be a positive experience. And by the time Venus leaves Gemini, I think you'll be the better off for it. Now, Venus passing through the 12th house seems very positive to me on the whole. Now, the 12th house is one of those negative traditional houses. It's the house of hidden enemies and isolation and self-undoing, meaning the places where we sabotage ourselves. It's the house of prisons, for example. So having a benefic planet light up this house is really nice because usually it means that those areas of our life that are 12th house, where we feel isolated, where we feel alone, where we feel, hemmed in, sometimes it can be a house of illness. Whatever those limitations are of the 12th house are going to be eased a little bit by Venus passing through that house. If you felt lonely before, you might feel more social. You might feel you have more people you can count on in your life. You might feel you have been released from prison, hopefully metaphorically speaking. In general, this is going to be a positive experience. Again, it might be slow. It might not be as fast as you would like. But overall, you're going to find it a beneficial and peaceful experience compared to perhaps the last few months. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was Venus through the 12 houses from a traditional perspective. My name is Nina Griffin, and I encourage you to subscribe for future videos. Take care.